When you really enjoy some excellent heirloom tomatoes, you may want to plant some of the seeds that are left on your cutting board. To do this, you'll want to ferment the seeds in order to make them viable. Remember that the seeds from heirloom tomatoes will produce the same plants and the same fruit as the parent tomato that produced the seeds. However, when you plant seeds from hybrid tomatoes, you never really know what you're going to get. All you have to do to ferment the seeds is to put the seeds and some of the juice on your cutting board into a jar and cover it with some cheesecloth, or if you don't have cheesecloth, with a paper towel. Whatever you cover it with, hold it in place with a rubber band. The purpose of the porous cover is to allow air inside but not insects. Keep the jar at room temperature for 3 or 4 days as the contents ferment. When there's a nasty colony of mold at the top of the solution, you'll see that some of the seeds have dropped to the bottom of the jar while others are floating up in the muck. The whole thing will smell pretty bad. The seeds at the bottom of the jar are the good ones. Those are the viable ones. The seeds floating up in the muck, they're going to be thrown away. Remove the cheesecloth or paper towel cover and pour the moldy mess from the top of the solution off, being careful not to pour out the good viable seeds resting at the bottom of the jar. Once the nasty part has been thrown out, you can rinse the good viable seeds with cool tap water using a fine strainer. Tap the rinsed seeds onto a paper plate, not a plastic plate or a paper towel. Use a paper plate. With a toothpick, carefully separate each seed from the next, giving each its own little space on the plate. Allow the plate of seeds to dry overnight. Again, put the plate in a warm place but not in direct sunlight. When the seeds are dry, you can use your fingernail to unstick each from the plate. That's why you want to use paper. You don't want to use paper towels or hard plates because they make popping the dried seeds from the surface all that much more difficult. All tomato seeds pretty much look alike, and if you're using a variety of different tomatoes, heirloom tomatoes, you can get confused very easily. You don't want to discover months later that your red and purple heirloom that you thought you planted turned out to be a yellow variety that you didn't really like all that much. So it's important to label every aspect of the project as you go along. If your garden supply store or hardware store carries those Jiffy-style plastic incubator greenhouses, great, go ahead and use those. If not, you can use an empty, extra large or jumbo paper-based egg carton. Use a large nail or an ice pick. Do they still make ice picks? Anyway, poke a lot of holes on the bottom of the egg carton cells. Fill each cell of the egg carton with finely ground peat moss. I prefer to use a fresh bag of clean peat moss to avoid contamination. Once the cells of the egg carton are filled with fresh peat moss, label some part of the carton with the name of the tomato variety and make a small hole in the center of the peat moss in each cell. If you don't want 18 of the same variety of heirloom tomatoes, you can germinate different varieties in the same egg carton, but you have to be very careful with your labeling. Once you have placed 1 or 2 seeds in the holes you made with a toothpick, gently fill the dirt over the seed. Using this method, the depth of the seed planting isn't all that important, but you want the seeds to be more or less in the center of each cell. If you accomplish that more or less, as I say, they will all germinate at about the same time, which is really convenient. So spray the planting heavily with cool water. Wait a few minutes and then spray again. Be sure everything is well wetted. Place the egg carton in a large plastic bag or in a greenhouse, if you made one of those out of plastic tubs or whatever you have. Keep the project in a warm, light place, but avoid direct sunlight. Every day, check to be sure that the contents of the carton are damp but not dripping wet. You don't want your seeds to dry out, but you also don't want them to rot. Don't ask them to grow in mud. When many or all of the seeds have come up, you can give the project a few minutes of diffused sunlight for very short periods of time, but be careful to keep the project from drying out. It's no longer in the plastic bag, and peat moss doesn't hold all that much water, and the egg cartons are very small. The tiny egg carton cells don't permit a lot of root development, so you will want to prepare some other containers for your seedlings. You can use medium-sized plastic cups, 4-inch nursery containers, or similar things. If you're using plastic drinking cups, poke holes in the bottom to allow for drainage. When you have filled a number of containers with a mixture of perlite and cactus mix nursery soil, separate the egg cells by carefully tearing or scissoring them apart. At this point, it's really important to remember your labeling. Label the destination containers right away to avoid confusion. When the young tomato plants are about 6 inches tall, dig a 1-foot hole in your garden area for each tomato plant and water that garden area with Ironite 101 for a few days before planting. When you're ready to plant your seedlings, backfill the foot-deep hole with a mixture of garden soil, gypsum, and a small handful of perlite. If you don't use the Ironite, plants may have an anemic yellow center. If you don't use the gypsum, more often than not, or at least some of your tomatoes will get blossom end rot due to lack of calcium. Ironite and gypsum are very inexpensive, and using them can help you avoid a whole lot of disappointment down the road. Once your plants have been in the ground a day or two, surround them with compost or mulch, being very careful not to allow the compost or mulch to actually touch the stem of the tomato plant. Stake and string your project, or surround them with cages, and get ready for a glorious harvest. Good luck and have fun.